Violent crime became a key issue on the campaign trail in the weeks leading up to Election Day.
And the outcome of the 2022 midterms will not only dictate the balance of power in Congress for the next 2 years, it will also dictate how Congress will respond to the issue of violent crime for years to come. According to the latest CBS News Battleground tracking poll, 46% of likely voters say they would feel safer under Republican Party control. 30% of those polled say the Democratic Party makes them feel safer. Let's bring in Joel Payne and Matt Gorman now for more on this. Joel is a CBS News political contributor and Democratic strategist. Matt is the vice president of Targeted Victory and the former communications director for the National Republican Congressional Committee. Joel, Matt, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks.
Thanks so much.
Matt, I just want to start with you. Why did violent crime become such a hot button issue in the late stages of the midterms?
Yeah, I think it bubbled up because people see it on their local news. And I think that's one of the most trusted mediums out there. And even in the suburbs, they see more violence uptick in cities. And I think also, too, it not necessarily driven by, say, arrests, but people feeling unsafe as they go in the cities. Quality of life has gone down. Smaller things that might not warrant an arrest, but that affect how you feel as you go to work, you go to dinner, or you spend time in a lot of major cities across the country.
Joel, let me bring you in. Democrats had a chance to counter the argument from Republicans on crime. Have they taken that opportunity in the days before today?
Oh, I suppose that poll would suggest that they haven't, the poll that you just cited there. And look, I think typically the electorate views Republicans as more of the party of law and order historically, and I think that that's reflected in current views of the electorate. I agree with Matt's point that people do feel less safe. I think that's for a lot of reasons. What they see on our local news, we're still in the midst of COVID. That has destabilized the country and a lot of communities, and that has added to a feeling of disorder. I do think it's interesting that if you look at statistics and if you're really a stat nerd, I mean, crime across the board is at historic lows, particularly in some of the big cities. And actually, if you look even deeper, some of the states that are really struggling with crime are states that are run by Republican governors. Obviously, voters don't always do that calculus when they're thinking about this, but it is important to remind us of those facts as we're thinking about why did voters land where they landed. I think Republicans have done a good job of creating a message track and making sure it's amplified and making sure that everybody's saying the same thing. I don't necessarily mean that that's backed up by facts.
Joel, you know me. I am a stat nerd. Thanks for the shout out. There was a counter punch that was available for Democrats to pivot to gun control in light of the mass shootings, in light of the hunger that is out there from some Americans for tighter gun control laws. Was that a way to respond to this crime issue, or is that just two different things, two different spheres, two different arguments?
Yeah, for certain, Scott. And I think, look, in some places, I think that has come up more. I think Governor Hochul in New York State, who's in a suddenly tough reelect, I think she certainly brought that up. Obviously, President Biden expended some political capital, and his allies on the Hill did with that gun safety piece of legislation after one of the recent mass shootings earlier this year. I just don't think voters associate Democrats with law and order, and that is a long-term messaging challenge for Democrats. I also think the problem is acute in certain parts of the country. Patty Murray's in for a tough reelect in Washington State tonight. In Seattle, crime is a big issue. I imagine she is feeling the impact of that more. In a state, again, like New York State, where in cities like New York City, there's been an uptick in some of these high-profile crimes. Not necessarily the numbers, but the high-profile crimes. I imagine that will be a big local issue. But across the board, I think most Americans actually think their communities are probably safe. They are just, again, as Matt said, they're seeing a lot of crime.
Matt, I want to go back to you. Do Republicans feel as though they can swing the power in Congress based on the issue of crime alone?
It's certainly one of the bigger issues. I think in the Northeast, if Mehmet Oz wins in Pennsylvania, it will be about crime. I know Fetterman's Health has gotten a lot of headlines, but it'll be on crime. He's run a lot of ads on that. And look, a couple points. And I think this is a general thing. I'm not picking on Joel here. I think by and large, Democrats made a mistake, not only with defunding the police. Let's set that aside for a minute. But it's almost like the economy, right? If a mother, say, feels worse off economically, you don't go and say with macroeconomic data, well, the GDP, technically you're better off. Same thing with the stats. I feel like Democrats have had a sense of almost being like an accountant, breaking out the spreadsheet and saying, well, actually, the crime rates are down. If people feel less safe, again, I keep hitting on this, even if folks aren't being arrested, right? If they go and they walk around, there's needles in the street. Or not even anything to do with guns. If folks are being pushed in front of subways, or there's slashings, or just people kind of randomly punching random people, as you see in New York a lot, that often feels contributing to this. And again, I think that's what Republicans have used this, but watch the Northeast. New York, Pennsylvania, even Connecticut, Northwest Connecticut, competitive House race, that could play a role.
Joel Payne, Matt Gorman, don't you miss the thrill of the arena on midterm election day? You all can watch it from the sidelines stress-free. Thank you both.